We're going to talk about who you are, where you come from, and also talk about your work.
Mhm.
But before we begin that, I would like to just acknowledge that we are on the Coast Salish territories of who I call my Coast Salish cousins, the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Katzie, the Coquitlam, and the Keite peoples. I hope I haven't missed anyone. And my name is Huchla Dorothy Christian from the Secwepemc and Silks Nations of the Interior. And I work here at grad and postdoctoral studies. And my title is the Associate Director of Indigenous Policy and Pedagogy. And within that work, I get to work with the Indigenous MA and PhD students. And that's really a part of my work that I hold close to my heart. So I really want to thank you today for taking the time, to sit with me and talk to me about your work. And I know that as a PhD candidate, your time is valuable. You have to be precious about where you spend your time. So, Jordyn, tell me who you are, who are your people, and where do you come from?
Well, first, I want to say it's great to be with you, Dorothy. I always, relish every opportunity to chat with you and to, share my story. Hopefully, it helps some other Indigenous grad students or students thinking about graduate school. So, as you said, my name is Jordyn Hrenyk. I'm Michif or Métis from Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, Local 7, which is around a small town or a town called Prince Albert. In Saskatchewan, and that's where I was born, there on Treaty 6 in my home territory. And I lived the first few years of my life there. But I actually grew up in different urban centers around British Columbia. And now I live on beautiful Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory in order to attend school here at SFU. My family is also German, Danish, and Ukrainian. Ukrainian is where my last name comes from. That's my dad's dad. And from my mom's side, of course, that's where the Michif family is. And our family names include, Smith, Boyer, Ferguson, Cardinal, and many others. And my whole family basically is in Saskatchewan in Treaty 6, except for my immediate family, meaning my parents and my two sisters who live in Songhees and Esquimalt territory, which is in this picture in the background behind me. Very beautiful Victoria, BC. Yeah, anything else you asked me there that I didn't answer?
No, that was really
Okay,
good. Thank you.
yeah,
Tell me about your PhD program. Where are
sure.
you at in your process, and what made you decide to come to SFU to do your PhD?
So I am a PhD candidate. I'm in my fourth year, and that means I passed, I finished all my coursework, I finished my comprehensive exams, and I finished my proposal defense. So the only thing is to complete the dissertation and defend that, which hopefully I'll be able to do within the next year. And as for how I ended up at SFU, I'm at the BD School of Business or the Segal Graduate School of Business here. But I was actually at a different university for my MSc program. I did an MSc in management, strategic management at Queen's University at the Smith School of Business. And when I was there, I was in a really accelerated MSc program that was meant to lead directly into the PhD. And I had completed, all the course requirements for my MSc. I'd applied and gotten into the PhD program there. We had to apply again. And I was set with a nice short grant to complete my studies at Queen's. And then towards the end of my year there, Dr. Dara Kelly, who is here at the BD School of Business, she came to Queen's and actually gave a talk based on her dissertation work. And when I was watching that presentation, it was the first time I had ever seen an Indigenous business professor, an Indigenous person with a PhD in business, particularly, of course, the first time I had met an Indigenous woman PhD in business. And I was so interested and so excited and so enthralled with her talk that at the end of it, I went up to her and asked if she would meet with me, and she graciously agreed to. And so we met later that day, and I just asked her what her process was like, what her PhD was like, what she learned from her PhD process. Because at the end of my MSc, it's a very intense program. I was already feeling exhausted, and the thing she told me, which I really hold still, is the MSc or a master's program is much more like a sprint,
Oh, sorry.
and no worries. And a PhD is much more like a marathon. And I really kind of took that to heart listening to her experience. And she told me about the supports that you need to get through a PhD program. And I just started to realize, like, from that conversation on, that I wanted to do my PhD closer to home, closer to my parents, to where I grew up, to where my existing support systems were. Because I had met a lot of great people in Ontario, but it wasn't, certainly within a year, it wasn't home. And I was worrying that I wouldn't have the support I needed out there. And so luckily I was able to apply to SFU after the deadline. And they still accepted me. And so I left Smith, made a very difficult decision to leave my program there, and came here, where I've had so much more support as an Indigenous student to learn about Indigenous business, and actually to work with Dr. Kelly as my co-supervisor.
That's great. I mean, I have a huge respect for Dara because
Hmm.
I've heard her talk about her work as well, and she's included me in some of her projects, and I'm really blessed to be able to uh, work with her in different ways and means. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why I love working again with Indigenous MA and PhD students, because I really believe that what we're bringing to the institutions is a
Hmm.
gift of Indigenous knowledge and ways of being and ways of knowing. And Dara's PhD was definitely that, right? Because you never ever think about, I mean, I was very curious when I first heard about her,
Hmm.
because you never think about Indigenous people and business,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's like, because we seem so like worlds apart from the whole capitalist idea of quotes unquote making profit.
Hmm.
So I really respect her, and I'm so happy that she's your co-supervisor.
Hmm.
So tell me more about your project. Who have you been talking to? As I One of the sentences that you wrote, one of the first things a new beater learns is how to manage tension. I
Hmm.
mean, that sentence just grabbed me, because just because of the word tension,
Hmm.
because there are so many tensions in engaging within a Euro-Western institution and bringing Indigenous knowledges in. Do you want
Hmm.
to talk a little bit more about that?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so my project is focused on bead workers, Indigenous bead workers around Turtle Island, and kind of their entrepreneurship, their self-employment through their beadwork. So everyone in my project sells their beadwork, usually online, but also in markets and things like that. And the sentence that you referenced is actually the first sentence of the dissertation, because that is really a driving force in the stories that I've heard. A lot of participants in my project, bead for themselves. They bead because it is healing for them. They bead in order to be in community with other people. They bead as ceremony, but they also bead for their livelihood. A lot of them. Some people do this as kind of, like a side hustle, you'd call it, where they bead in order to be able to keep beading. They sell their work in order to buy supplies and things like that. But there are quite a few participants and quite a few beaders out there who this is their full-time employment. And that could be for many different reasons. For some people, they are caregivers, and or parents and or students, and or sometimes people are chronically ill, and so this kind of flexible work is the best work for them. But at the same time, that often means bringing in some of their personal life, their spiritual life, their ceremonial life into this realm of capitalism, honestly. And within my project, I look at a lot of what I call pivots or refusals and ways that participants ensure they're still able to live out their values in their work while also operating in this very totalizing system of capitalism that we can try to avoid, but we still live in the modern world and we still live in, times where you need cash, you need money. So it is a lot of tension for a lot of artists to price their work, to decide how much to price their work for, how much they're going to sell, how much they're going to work. There's a lot of tension that they're holding when they're making those decisions.
Another part of your research that interests me is the intersection of art and business.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, can you talk about that a little? I know that I've sat on juries for the Canada Council and looking at art as business, right,
Mm-hmm.
is a whole different domain in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole field, and some of my work does fit right in that area. My master's thesis was similar. I looked at Indigenous owned restaurants and food-based businesses, and it's the same kind of thing. These artists, and in that case chefs, put so much of themselves into their work, and then to price that work is very difficult because they're giving their memories, they're giving their ideas, their ceremonies, and having to put a price on it. And some people do that very happily and they like their work and they feel proud to be able to share their work with other people. But for some people, it's a real tension in not wanting even to, not even trying to bring money into it. But of course, it does. And one thing I want to remind us is, of course, Indigenous people have always had economies. But our economies were not always based in this way, and we're not always this arm's length from each other. So if you were making something to trade or even sell, you would know that person and you would have a relationship with that person. Whereas a lot of the transactions that we are used to now are separated. So I think what is difficult for some artists is that separation between who they're making the work for and how people are experiencing their work. So a lot of participants, like to have a smaller audience, like to know who they're selling their work to, like to build a relationship as much as they can. So know, it's kind of funny. It's like puppies. They want their work to go to a good home. So sometimes participants will make work and they're not ready to part with it, and they'll take a long time in order to sell it. And that's part of, I think, the artistic process is really needing to be ready to let your artwork go and let other people, once it's out of the artist's hands, it really belongs to the audience. And that's something people need to work through. And that's where business intersects with it a lot, because there's so much pressure to hurry that process along, which is not what an artist would want, I think.
Well, and I think another tension, if you will, is people looking at beading as a business
Mm-hmm.
or as an art
Yeah.
form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because so many things around our Indigenous cultures get dismissed,
Yeah.
right? And marginalized, as if it's kind of like our stories, get reduced to mythology
Yeah.
rather than creation stories that come from the land that we are born to.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that tension between art and dollars, I know when I sat on those juries, I used to have that internal tension of having to pass judgment
Mm,
on someone else's work,
yeah.
artwork, right?
Yeah, and there is a big conversation. I mean, it's more within the art world, but it shows up in my work as well with this idea between craft and art.
Yes.
And I'm a little bit agnostic in that discussion. I think artists can see their work however they want to, but you will find that a lot of women's art, whether that's quilting, knitting, like fabric arts or beadwork. A lot of, it's not just women's art, but it's relegated to this realm of women's art, and that's kind of labeled as craft, which is very devalued, not only in terms of the amount people are willing to pay for it, but in the way this art world kind of looks at it and critiques it and judges it, as you've said. Beadwork takes no less skill than painting or anything else. And actually, one of my participants talks about, she is a painter as well. One of the things she talks about is, in painting, she can always cover it up. It's really easy to cover it up and try again tomorrow. And with beadwork, everyone will see every stitch. And it's actually quite difficult to go back and take things out unless you notice it immediately right away. So it's not that beadwork or any of these other kind of textile or crafts, as they're called, it's not that it takes less skill, it's that it's respected less. And a lot of that has to do with the people who are doing it, in this case, Indigenous women. And it's quite devalued. And that is something I talk about in my work as well.
Oh, good. Tell me, how many beaders have you talked to?
Sure. So one-on-one conversations, which, on average lasted 90 minutes approximately. I've spoken with 38 beaters. I've talked to some of them several times, some of them only once. But I also do a bit of, I think you would call it participant observation. That's what I call it in my project,
Yes.
in which I've joined a lot of virtual beading circles. So for the last 2 years, I guess, I've been joining regular beading circles and kind of building my own community, not to record what people say or to write down what they're saying, but just to experience the community so that I can interpret what's happening in a more accurate way. So I've also met a lot of beaders through that. I've gone to a lot of events about beadwork. There's a lot of museum discussions and artistic discussions with beaders about beadwork. So I tried to attend as many of those as I can, but I've had 38, named participants, and I'm hoping to talk to about 10 more before my project kind of wraps up.
That's a great sample size. I mean, I know that there's even a tension there, right?
Mhm.
I remember when I was going through my PhD process, because I kept calling it knowledge gathering, and the university, of course, calls it data collection.
Yeah.
And I mean, I understand, I mean, as a scholar and just as a person, the value of being able to have so-called data,
Mm.
but it's just how it's broken down, I guess, or how it's done. I love the fact that you've joined numerous beading circles, right? Because when I was going and doing my field work, I flew all over Turtle Island to talk to many different nations. And I purposely did that because I wanted to go to their home. I wanted to feel their environment.
Mhm.
I wanted to see their aesthetics of what it was and where it was that they were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's such a powerful way of engaging in the
Mhm.
community, right? Is to actually be there. Because I had a pretty large sample as well. I had over 28 people from many different nations,
Mhm.
which of course made my methodology chapter quite complex
Yes.
because of all the different nations I spoke to and the accountabilities that I felt.
Mm.
Because I also went and presented to my community, my chief and council, to let them know what I was doing. And I met with the elders group in my community so that they knew what I was doing. And
Mhm.
I heard teachings from them about how to manage stories, so yeah, I mean, that's I think really critical in terms of the gift that we're bringing to the um, institution in terms of methodologies, that can you tell me a little bit about what you've experienced in terms of methodologies?
Yeah, so I can say my methodology chapter is much longer than most of my colleagues, most of my non-Indigenous colleagues here at the business school. And it's for the reasons you talked about. I take my method methodology, ontology extremely seriously. I was very fortunate before I really started my research. I was able to take a directed studies course with my supervisor, Dr. Kelly, which was all about Indigenous methodologies in management research, which is a course that does not exist anywhere outside of DARA creating that for me. So I was able to really do a deep dive on methodology before I ever started my project, which I feel very fortunate for. And it is extremely difficult to manage a sample as diverse as yours or mine. You know, my participants also come from all over Turtle Island, and they have their own expectations and protocols. And to be honest, some could care less what I'm doing. You know, I always offer to have conversations about what this will mean and what the interview is and how it's going to unfold and what will happen after. And quite a few will say, it doesn't matter. Do you want me to sign something? So I'll send them the form and that's all they want to do. And in some cases, they don't want to sign a form. They want to have the conversation, give oral consent. And so you just have to be really flexible and really responsive to what people want and offer everything and let them tell you how they want to be, in the research. In my methodology chapter, I actually have this story about, I think I called it Two Sisters. And there's one bead worker who was relatively new to the kind of beadwork space, like selling her work. She'd been beading for a long time, but she'd never sold any of her work and was kind of brought in through one of the Indigenous fashion weeks. And her work was displayed there. And then she kind of, I don't know, took off, became internet famous. And she normally is a very private person, and she declines most interviews. And she had never done anything like my project, an interview like mine before, which I didn't know at the time. I learned all of that from her sister-in-law, who told me afterwards. I asked the sister-in-law, I said, you know, how would you like to be in this project? I told her about all the different ethical protocols. And she stopped me and she said, doesn't matter. You know, my sister, basically my sister redded you. I'm perfectly happy if she's happy. And we were able to just continue through that. And that I feel is a kind of protocol that doesn't make a lot of sense to the university, but made sense to me as a person, you know, from a Métis families are extremely matriarchal. And if my sister said it was okay, I would think, you know, it's okay. And so that's the kind of process that's unfolding for me, is really just trying to listen and respond to my participants as individuals and providing them updates and things like that as the project progresses. Because some, you know, gave their interview and that's all they want to do. And some want to be more engaged. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it really does mean engaging in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I did with my dissertation, which I remember when I did it, Joanne saying to me, nobody's ever done this before, right? So we had to see whether it could get through grad studies, right? And what I did was, at the very beginning of my dissertation, I put a caveat around copyright, because I had been given permission to use a coyote story from the Secwepemc Nation in its entirety, right? In the language with English subtitles. And I was really conscious of the history, you know, that my nation has had with academia, you know, in terms of non-Indigenous researchers coming in and stealing our knowledge, literally, and copywriting it under their own name.
Right.
So I made this caveat saying that although the university assigned me copyright to the dissertation, that I would accept that only on my work.
Right.
That any stories that were shared with me with any of the knowledge keepers, that the copyright sat with those nations. Because I had stories from Seneca, from Haida, from Cree, from Secwepemc, you know, so I had to really be careful. And I know that, and it comes down to what you were saying about trust, how that sister gave you the trust, because many of the people that I engaged know me and know my work.
Mhm.
So they trusted me and they were able to share. I mean, they did share
Yeah.
very generously because they knew that I would take care of things.
Mhm. And
So,
that in itself is so it's a lot of pressure on a student. It's wonderful to have, you know, the trust of your participants, and it's also a very scary thing because taking um, taking into consideration your position as a student, the school has expectations of you. Your participants, of course, have to come first, but reconciling those two worlds is a lot of pressure. So if any, you know, students are feeling that pressure, I think that's normal. You know, Indigenous methodologies, as you've said, don't really fit into the common structures of a methodology. And so even though there are Indigenous students who have been doing this for decades, it's still new. It's still new. Every time, you know, I'm presenting in front of an audience here at the business school, it's new for many of the people there. So we're consistently feeling that pressure um, from all sides, I think.
absolutely. And I think that each project that each Indigenous scholar does is going to be unique to their project.
Hmm.
You know, and this goes so against the grain of what academia wants to do. It wants to put everybody into the same box, right?
Yeah.
And we can't do that with Indigenous knowledges because of the diversity, you
Hmm.
know, of knowledge systems.
Hmm.
And yeah, so people are just beginning to learn that, I think,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
there's no, you know, citation I can put that says I'm using this methodology and then move on. I have to start at the beginning. And I do actually borrow from, you know, your supervisor, Joanne Archibald's work in some of what I'm trying to do. And of course, I've learned from other, particularly like Métis and Michif scholars that have come before. I've learned a lot from their perspective on our values and how I'm bringing that lens in. But as you said, every Indigenous student is developing basically a personalized methodology. And so you do have to start at the beginning for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And because, and I think that we feel a level of accountability, you know, that isn't necessarily there, you know,
Hmm.
for most non-Indigenous researchers.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it's kind of like I think we have you just know, you know, like I had to go to my community to let them know what I was doing, right? And
Mhm.
I had to sit with the elders circle and let them know what I was doing, you know,
Mhm.
because I mean, even in my defense process, I asked an elder from Squamish to be with me there at my defense, so that this was for my MA, because I felt that in case anyone from my community said we have no idea what you're doing, I could refer them to this elder
Yeah.
at Squamish so he could verbally explain what he had witnessed, you
Mhm.
know, at my thesis defense, you know. So it's, yeah, I mean, I think we just approach it in many different ways. And I mean, I was very lucky that I had a supervisor during my MA who was open to I mean, she didn't know what I was doing, but she let me do it
Mhm.
because I did a giveaway at the end as well, right?
Mhm.
My sister and my brothers came, and I had community members there, and women came and sang the honor song or the women's warrior song. Once they came back and said that I had passed
Mm.
with minor revisions, right? And so then it's like the whole event just changed into a different space of giving.
Yeah.
So I gave gifts to my committee and to the external and to the elder and to people who were just witnessing.
Mhm.
So that's another part that I don't think that a lot of Indigenous students think about, in terms of when they get close to the finish line,
Mhm.
is that they can indigenize their defense, right?
Yeah, one of the things I did for just my proposal defense, and it made me so much more comfortable. It was a very small thing. I came early to the room. It was a room here on campus. I came early to the room and I moved all the chairs out of the way and I put the chairs in a circle. And I knew I would be standing at, a podium still. So I put myself in the front and I just decided we were going to do this in a at least in a circle, if nothing else. I brought in food and drink because a teaching that I've been given is that when you're sharing ideas, those ideas are absorbed with the food that you're eating. So I brought in, cookies and juice or something like that and some fruit and just tried to bring in my protocols. And the poor management information systems professor who came in to kind of lead the session had no idea what he was walking into, but he was very gracious about it. But yeah, you can do these things to make your protocols visible, to make
Mhm.
your knowledge systems visible, even when you're working in um, a stronger kind of institution or a lot of expectations around it. You can still do things in your own way. So I really encourage students to bring their whole selves in with their work. And I've been very fortunate to have supervisors who not only are okay with Jordyn the whole self, but encourage me to do that. And of course, Dr. Kelly has had that experience herself, but not many business students have Indigenous supervisors or even supervisors as knowledgeable and as integrated in this world as my non-Indigenous supervisor is. So I understand I'm in a very fortunate position, but you know, um, bringing in your protocols is going to make things so much easier for you, even in these small things like a proposal defense.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And it just it gives you a different sense of being, right? When you're there and you're doing this work because
Mhm.
you're coming from a completely different place. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about in terms of your project or your PhD process?
In terms of my project, I work with Indigenous beadworkers, and I'm really looking at, I'm thinking a lot about and writing about how these Indigenous entrepreneurs create community. Many live outside of their home territories. Uh, some have never lived in their home territories. Some are extremely embedded, but no matter where they are able to find community with each other in the same way you did. You built that community as a student with people outside the university. A lot of these entrepreneurs are doing the same, and this work is really helping us to understand that kind of community building among each other. So I really want to um, just say thanks to all of my participants. It's a long process, and so many of them have been so gracious with their time. And of course, I wouldn't be here without their support. So just that, pick a project that you can think about every single day for 5 years. I have been a beater for a long time, and I knew that I wouldn't get sick of beating in 5 years. So yeah, that's my only advice is to pick something you're going to care about because you'll have to think about it a lot.
I know I used to talk about falling in and out of love
Hmm.
with my project
Yeah.
because sometimes it just got to be too much, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's a very needy partner, your dissertation. It
yes,
takes a lot, as much as you'll give.
absolutely. I mean, it's just so it can be so filling of your whole world.
Hmm.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Now, have you engaged in your PhD process in the institutional linear fashion, of going from your coursework to your comps to your research project and then field work?
So the first half was quite linear. As I mentioned, I did a research-based master's, and then came to SFU, and I kind of came in then as like a second year student, because I had done a year of coursework that everything transferred over. So I did a year of coursework here at SFU, and then I wrote my comprehensive exams, and that was kind of like the green light to get started on my dissertation. And so right from that point, from my second year, I was developing a proposal. And I didn't defend my proposal for 2 more years. I spent 2 years engaging in fieldwork, engaging in theoretical development, reading every possible thing I could find. But I think maybe even before my comprehensive exams were totally done, or around that time, I already had ethics approval. So I was already in early conversations with participants, trying to figure out what this project could be, what could be of value to them, what I could offer back to them. And since then, I really went through 2 years of just cycling around through research and writing and field work and around and around. And then finally, once I got to the proposal defense, I already had a really solid idea of what this project will be. And so now I'm a few months removed from my proposals defense, and I have already had that time really to write and to think about the ideas. And this kind of second round of data gathering that I'm doing is more confirmatory, like making sure I understand what I'm writing, making sure my participants feel it's accurate and that kind of thing. So it certainly wasn't, I don't think, the typical path, particularly for a business student. And it has been very cyclical, especially this writing process. And I've been engaging with my participants now for well over 2 years. Some of them are probably quite sick of me, but it has been a very iterative process.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like you're letting your research lead you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather
Oh,
than,
absolutely. Yeah,
right?
I've actually been I don't know if criticized is the right word, but I was told I'm very overly deferential to what my participants want me to do. And I think that's good. And I really do try to listen to what they're interested in and what they care about. Because I'm interested in lots of things. I can go right off and do anything I want, but this project for me is about them. So
Mhm.
I do really try to listen to what my participants are showing interest in, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think in that way, I mean, in that sense, your people that you're talking to are going to feel that kind of respect that you're extending. And I feel that they'll most likely share more in depth with you than if you were just coming in, flying in, sticking a recording device on the table, or
Hmm.
Zoom, whatever, and they'll feel a lot more taken care of, I
Mm.
guess, because it is more caring. But so what other advice do you have for graduate students, Indigenous grad students?
Another thing that just came to mind for me is I think this is maybe the opposite advice that you would get from some other people, but I think it's really important to pick a topic that um, you are personally invested in. I don't sell my beadwork. I've only ever given my beadwork away, more due to the non-confidence in my skills. But I do feel of that community, that urban, or whatever you want to call it, this online community of Indigenous beaders. I feel a part of it. I feel I understand what people are talking about. I feel I understand what people care about. So before I even stepped into this project, I wanted to pick something that I was personally invested in. And I really recommend that. I think some people would say pick a topic that you can, you know, um, turn off your mind about at the end of the day, not think about it on the weekends. I'm always thinking about beading. So for me, it's been, again, a sustaining thing. I can think about beading all the time. So pick something that you know you'll be able to think about every day and that you have a personal stake in. I think also it'll make your writing better. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think that the way that I've talked about it to potential grad students is to uh, think about and research something that you're passionate about.
Hmm.
And I've talked about falling in and out of love with the work,
Yeah.
and how, because it's going to be all consuming for a number of years, and
Hmm.
you need to be able to share that and hold it, like be able to hold the space
Hmm.
for that. But yeah, no,
Yeah, and I think that love is really important, like as as a metaphor, but in actuality, you can if you actually love the topic and you can sustain it and always come back to it, it's not gonna I think it won't wear you out maybe as much. It is gonna be something that sustains you and drains you. You know what I mean? I
yeah.
think beading is even like that for some of my participants. They feel better when they're beading, even though it is their work, and you can't discount that work is tiring, but it is something that gives sustenance to them. And I think this research has been that way for me.
How did COVID affect your process? Because I mean, for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so, my COVID's kind of started right when I did my comps. So, I have not done any field work in a non-COVID world, and in qualitative research, at least in business, I can't speak to other fields, but kind of before COVID in qualitative research, it was really looked down upon, I guess, to do interviews at a distance, whether that's over the phone or video call or whatever it was. But the pandemic shifted that because for a couple years, that was the only way anyone was able to talk to anyone else. The only way you could get it through an ethics process, for example. So that shifted my process entirely. I was intending have a much smaller group of participants, maybe even based here in Vancouver or something like that, who I could see face to face. And that just was not going to be possible. And I didn't know for how long it wasn't going to be possible. So at that time, I really kind of said, okay, what will work about this? And one thing I noticed and started hearing from people that I was in early conversations with was how much the pandemic spurred beating on, how much it made beating kind of have this resurgence. Actually, a lot of my participants who, beaded as a kid, beaded with their aunt or mom as a young person, or beaded in school in some cases as a young person, during COVID was the first time they had picked it up in years for many of them because they were able to join these online communities of bead workers. They were able to join virtual beading circles that became something they could hold, this connection point. So actually, being online has done a lot for the beadworking community, and I realized, this is this is something I can talk about. This is something I can think about in my work, and how it's changing the beadworking landscape. So my project went completely online, and now I do focus only on um, participants who sell their work through some kind of online means. That started as a very practical thing because I figured that people who knew how to sell online would be able to use Zoom and feel comfortable talking with me online and building a relationship online. But there's also a lot of theoretical aspects to that as well, and how it changes people's perspective in having community at a distance. So I don't know if blessing in disguise is the right way to talk about it, but it definitely shifted my perspective at the start of my project till now.
Mm-hmm. No, because I've heard actually over the pandemic a number of CBC interviews with beaters
Hmm.
who are talking about exactly the different things that you've said,
Yeah.
how it's revitalized and it brought it back. They hadn't been doing it since childhood and picked it up again, and all
Hmm.
those different things, and the business end of learning how to sell
Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
get.
it has really opened up this market,
Mhm.
honestly. Most people would sell in community at markets and things like that, where now I have participants who talk about selling their work all over the world,
Yeah,
who that wouldn't have been the case a couple years ago, I think.
yeah, yeah. I know, it's like I see some beautiful work online. But
It's the hardest part of my project is I have kind of had to set an ethical line where I don't buy beadwork for my participants. And it is the only thing keeping me from basically going broke. So
believe me, I can relate. It's like I have a whole collection of earrings, and I have to do a giveaway at least, every couple of years because I have so many.
Yeah.
And I really love supporting, people who are doing the work.
Hmm.
So I mean, next weekend, I think it is, the Niska Hobier is going to be,
Yeah.
happening at the PNE ground. So we'll be able to see all kinds of beadwork there,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
so yeah. Okay, I think that's all that I have in terms of questions. Is
Right.
there anything else that you want to share?
No, I just want to say thanks again for including me in this. I hope my story can be helpful to some other students or potential students. And, I'm always happy to connect with other Indigenous graduate students. So hopefully something can come of this as well.
I think so too. And I mean, hats, hands up to you, for taking on such an incredible piece of work, and in a discipline where not very many Indigenous people are. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Was the first time they had picked it up in years for many of them because they were able to join these online communities of beadworkers. They were able to join virtual beading circles that became, something they could hold, this connection point. So actually, being online has done a lot for the beadworking community. And I realized, this is something I can talk about. This is something I can think about in my work, and how it's changing the beadworking landscape. So my project went completely online, and now I do focus only on um, participants who sell their work through some kind of online means. That started as a very practical thing because I figured that people who knew how to sell online would be able to use Zoom and feel comfortable talking with me online and building a relationship online. But there's also a lot of theoretical aspects to that as well, and how it changes people's perspective in having community at a distance. So I don't know if blessing in disguise is the right way to talk about it, but it definitely shifted my perspective at the start of my project till now.
Mm-hmm. No, because I've heard actually over the pandemic a number of CBC interviews with beaders
Hmm.
who are talking about exactly the different things that you've said.
Yeah.
How it's revitalized and it brought it back. They hadn't been doing it since childhood and picked it up again, and all
Hmm.
those different things, and the business end of learning how to sell
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
To
Yeah,
get
it has really opened up this market.
Mhm.
Honestly, most people would sell in community at markets and things like that, where now I have participants who talk about selling their work all over the world,
Yeah,
who that wouldn't have been the case a couple years ago, I think.
yeah, yeah. I know, it's like I see some beautiful work online, but
It's the hardest part of my project is I have kind of had to set an ethical line where I don't buy beadwork for my participants. And it is the only thing keeping me from basically going broke. So
believe me, I can relate. It's like I have a whole collection of earrings, and I have to do a giveaway at
Mm,
least, every couple of years because I have so many.
yeah.
And I really love supporting, people who are doing the work.
Mhm.
So, I mean, next weekend, I think it is, the Niska Hobier is going to be,
Yeah,
happening at the PNE ground. So we'll be able to see all kinds of beadwork there,
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah.
so yeah. Okay, I think that's all that I have in terms of questions. Is
Right.
there anything else that you want to share?
No, I just want to say thanks again for including me in this. I hope my story can be helpful to some other students or potential students. And, I'm always happy to connect with other Indigenous graduate students. So hopefully something can come of this as well.
I think so too. And I mean, hats, li- hands up to you, for taking on such an incredible piece of work, and in a discipline where not very many Indigenous people are. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We will talk soon.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thank you.